Warning. The system has become unstable.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, to the Infernal Paganism YouTube channel. So, a Satanist outside of the USA had asked me my opinion about a debatable need for Satanism to rebrand itself. Doing so, he also wondered if that is even a possibility. Moreover, he rightly notes that what many topically relevant scholars now refer to as contemporary religious Satanism is gravely misunderstood outside of America. That is to say that it is misinterpreted in the tradition of what is commonly called the era of the Satanic Panic. With that comparison, he further acknowledges that it is not much better, if at all, understood within the United States itself. Certainly, I concur with this qualification that it is impractical to expect the vast sum of non-Satanists who inextricably become interested in delineating between the theosophical, small t, theological, philosophical reality of our minority religion from the propagandistic urban legends that besmirch it. Instructive on that point, let us each honestly consider the nearly endless array of topics in life that we ourselves, rightly or wrongly, view to be antisocial, socially deleterious, and or simply unappealing because we do not organically resonate with it. Accepting the inescapable fact that we therefore sometimes err to not educate ourselves on whatever that particular example of our own iteration of the other happens to be. Examined through that simple lens, we avoid the third of Anton LaVey's 9 satanic sins, which is solipsism, and is defined as the thinking fallacy of expecting others to feel, think, and or conduct themselves as we do, or at least as we envision the ideal version of ourselves doing. And, make a little notation there for myself for later. Okie dokie. So anecdotally, I not only lived openly as a Satanist during the era of the Satanic Panic, but happenstance eventually catapulted me into becoming a high-profile Satanist in 1988. A consequence of that spotlight that shone so brightly upon both me and subsequently my high-profile satanic witch ex-wife was that we were both physically attacked at different times by professed Christians busily doing the Lord's work. Moreover, my ex-wife owned 2 occult bookstores before we jointly owned a third in 1999. Our store, Pandora's Box, in Port St. Lucie, Florida, in the USA, was an internationally renowned satanic bookstore that functioned in part as a then Church of Satan contact point vis-a-vis my then public face of the Infernal Order of the Left-Hand Path, known as the Nepotism Grotto. As for her earlier shops, they were both targeted with criminal acts of vandalism. Additionally, as a couple, even our residence and some of our vehicles were subjected to vandalism motivated by satanic panic hysteria. Disturbingly, one of our cats was literally left at our front door with its skull crushed. Apparently, that was supposed to really castigate us for purportedly butchering animals, such as cats, during fictitious animal sacrificing rites to the devil. As a point in fact, that feline was actually the beloved familiar to Johnny Romano, who was one of the 4 horsemen of the Order of the Apocalypse, which is to say the inner or magic circle of the Infernal Order. Unsurprisingly, then, we also suffered home invasions. In fact, shortly after I chased an intruder out of our former house through the side door that led into 2 densely undeveloped wooded lots, my ex-wife was reportedly attacked on another occasion. So I'll add here, ad-libbing, don't know if it was the same person or a different person, but it was like within a couple of months of one another, I believe. It was then that I made the news by hunting for the apparent assailant with a pistol in the very same woods as I arrived home, and they fled the alleged scene of the crime. Soon thereafter, I received mail from the then San Francisco headquarters of the Church of Satan that in part expressed Anton LaVey's concern over that egregious breach of our society's would-be social contract. Part and parcel to such unhinged religious lunacy, we endured a plethora of death and bomb threats, and to our sheer psychological horror, even more than once received discomforting reports from school officials about other student body parents demanding that the school identify our children to them. Ultimately, we encountered numerous controversies that occasionally became the subject of extensive news media coverage. Needless to say, then, this overarching topic that reasonably considers everything from people making benign stereotypes about Satanists to bias-motivated misdeeds violative of criminal and civil rights laws, collectively defines this brief topical treatment. All right, let me back up again. I got tongue-tied. Needless to say, then, this overarching topic that reasonably considers everything from people making benign stereotypes about Satanists to bias-motivated misdeeds violative of criminal and civil rights laws collectively defines this brief topical treatment presented as a reply to the aforementioned question posed to me. Hence, it is a thematic subject that I am all too intimately familiar with from my own personal life. Alternately stated, this topic is not just a simple thought experiment on my part. Move this. See. I think that's better. Okay, that's better. Live and learn, people. Live and learn. Serving hereafter as a nexus adjoining the foregoing facts and my well-informed opinions to follow, I offer paragraphs 4, 6, 10, and 15 excerpted from an inflammatory essay titled A Malediction by Zena Schreck, née LaVey. The screed in question was initially published in the Black House Sourcebook while she was still at least a de facto High Priestess of the Church of Satan in 1989. Starting with paragraph 4. So, quoting Zena, I hate the morons that think Satanism is like stamp collecting, a hobby to share with their friends. I hate people who want to be nice or good or ethical Satanists. What saps. Why not just call themselves white Satanists? I hate wimps that write to me saying, I'm all for bringing Satanism out into the open, and it's great what you're doing, and I would really love to be more active in the satanic revolution, but could you please send my information back to me in a plain envelope? I'm afraid it might upset my landlady, who's 72 years old. I'll bet his landlady is already a Satanist. And finally, from paragraph 15, I hate people who say they agree with every tenet and understand completely the satanic philosophy, but then plead, why couldn't you just call it something else? That they might have even been members of the Church of Satan if it were called something else. They obviously miss the point. To a Satanist, the word is as inoffensive as oatmeal would be to them. They have only succeeded in proving that they, in fact, do not understand it at all and just want us to name it something sweet for these milksops to feel as if they belong. Surely, there's no great loss there. End quote. Although I partially agree with Zena's vitriolic take on a theme strikingly similar with the instant review, the following facts must be understood on the outset. Firstly, I am not directing her bombastic commentary as a passive-aggressive code to the gentleman that inspired this writing. Secondly, I must emphasize that my qualified concurrence with her is tempered by a broader perspective that Zena herself should have had the wisdom to identify and tactically apply during her tenure as a public Satanist and or initiate of the left-hand path. As noted in the late Michael Aquino's book, The Church of Satan, Volume 1, when he was still a Church of Satan representative, he took affront to the late Anton LaVey's policy of bifurcating the priesthood of Mendez between public and underground members of the Satanic priesthood. Specifically, that executive decision by her father should have informed Zena's essay in relation to its contextual totality. As for the above snapshot of her stated topical disposition, that scathing critique is a posture entirely congruent with LaVeyan Satanism's canonical repudiation of the pseudo-satanic attempt to don a culturally superfluous good guy badge. Parenthetically, full disclosure requires that I note that the gentleman that inspired this topical review is, like myself, politically right-wing. Pertinent to that revelation, his query was framed within the parameters of how those of us that comprise the right-wing left-hand path can best network with and transactionally utilize non-Satanists that are otherwise aligned with our socio-political worldview. The debatable prescience of that question is tethered to the fact that both sides of this already rather protracted culture war appear to be teetering precariously upon the precipice of a catastrophic tipping point. This question is therefore a materially significant one because, although our socio-political rivals potentially face the same ignorant anti-satanic bigotry as we do, our typical socio-political allies tend to reflexively recoil when they discover that they are confederated with a real-life Satanist. Antithetically, sectarian satanic socialism has a place within the postmodern intersectional identity politics of cultural Marxism, as evinced by organizations like the Satanic Temple. Hence, within a so-called coalition of the disenfranchised, that activist iteration of self-professed Satanism is as welcome within the ranks of the so-called far left as are other fringe extremists like the Rubes, who hilariously calling themselves Queers for Palestine. I can't even say it without laughing. As for the alleged Big Tent coalition of the would-be right, its factional Judeo-Christian plurality of the Big Tent electorate is undeniably predisposed to reactively clutch its collective pearls over the dreaded S-word. Without treating the substantive issue at hand, it is nevertheless worth noting that the Finnish scholar Kenneth Granholm has proffered the thesis of academically abandoning the term Satanism in favor of either post-Satanism or the far more popular label left-hand path. Contextually, both proposals are meritorious monikers. Yet, as some of his colleagues have convincingly countered, Satanism, as so captioned by both etic, that is outsider, and emic, insider, sources of meaningful examination, remains a viable academic term of reference. To our heretofore, to our concern here, I need something to drink. To our concern here, hypothetically substituting Satanism for either of the above-cited alternative labels is still statistically likely to engender a socially conditioned negative response. Then again, within certain quarters of the right wing, things like Hinduism, astrology, and even secularized yoga are deemed to be satanic. Of course, I have long encouraged my mentees and or initiates, even during my former years as a Church of Satan priest, to live as underground Satanists. Truly, I have met and in some cases been friends with Satanists in politics. Thus, the bottom line is that there are endless socioeconomic and or socio-political reasons to safeguard one's satanic religiosity from discovery by non-Satanists, to include hiding that fact even from one's most intimate associates. Cheers. Gotta wet the whistle, people. Gotta wet the whistle. Okie dokie. So, that disposition invariably leads to the following 2 points. Firstly, public Satanists such as myself cannot put the metaphorical genie back into the allegorical bottle. Secondly, those that refrain from outing themselves within the public square may find it difficult to meaningfully, if ever, engage in communal fellowship with other Satanists. It must be noted that the Satanic Bible unambiguously avers that Satanists avoiding such cultural congress arguably present evidence of an antisocial disorder. Indeed, Anton LaVey consistently highlighted the role of such interaction because humanity is a social animal. Pertinent to his relevantly referenced characterization, evolutionary psychology and related fields like anthropology identify humanity as a species defined by its ultra-sociability. This conundrum is not one that is easily overcome, but is also obviously well within the realm of possibility. Navigating that murky abyss of PR requires the presence of mind of a rather circumspect Satanist that does not loudly come out of the satanic closet. Notably, Anton LaVey spoke of that phenomenon as an attribute of first-level Satanism, and although not exclusive to Iron Youth, it is definitely a common thread among young Satanists. Alas, as the proverbial they say, youth is wasted on the young. One way many Satanists approach this matter is by only allowing those that they reasonably trust within a well-established microcosmic Microcosmic Mutual Admiration Mutual Admiration Society to discover their secret identity. Indeed, that has essentially been the same route that I've tended to pursue for nearly a quarter of a century now. I used to be super duper high profile and in the media and stuff, and like 99% of that stuff I want nothing to do with again. It's a waste of time, people. Yes, it is true that I cannot conceal my identity construct as a longtime public representative of the Satanic movement. Thus, although I openly exercise my ongoing ambassadorship as a public Satanist, I usually do so in a manner focusing on the insular social infrastructure of the Satanic left-hand path and refrain from courting attention outside of what many topical scholars relevantly refer to as the Satanic milieu. Instructive on this front is the so-called radical left and its long march through the institutions, which is a political and cultural strategy originally coined by German socialist activist Rudi Dutschke in the 1960s. It describes the process of achieving radical societal change by gradually infiltrating existing mainstream institutions rather than fighting them through direct, violent revolution. For decades, individuals like myself have warned about such a socialist/communist campaign hidden in plain sight, but it wasn't until approximately the last decade and a half that politically unaware normies realized that they are now contending with an ensconced institutional power structure that is emboldened enough to say the quiet parts out loud. Their recent zeitgeist of boast, power grabs, and arguable efforts at a concluding coup de grace reasonably demonstrate that their long-sought feat is no longer simply what Anton LaVey in part defined as the Invisible War. And it was in one of those, I believe, 2019 documentaries. I think 3 different documentaries came out in 2019. I believe it was one of those where Blanche Barton said that the world is now so blatant with its propaganda that it's no longer invisible. It's quite visible. So, okay. As a self-preserving social Darwinist, Anton also consistently issued other arguably canonical commentary on this general theme. Among them is that a real Satanist, irrespective of their personal political preferences, is an adaptive chameleon-like creature that can successfully fit within any particular socio-political paradigm. The multi-layered lesson, then, is as follows. Some Satanists have and shall continue to self-impose their own exile from the Satanic milieu in order to continue the Satanic movement's infiltration within our respective socio-political power structures. Others will act in an effort to balance the two worlds as a so-called cabal of would-be sleeper cells. In both of those scenarios, it is crucial that Satanists procreate with a religious, or at least a right-wing ideological peer, and clandestinely rear their children as true generational Satanists. Whenever possible, such an ennobled satanic house, in medieval jargon, should covertly network with other such families. The term is secret society. Secret society. The only other topical category is to accept the premise vociferously proffered by Zena in the above quotation. That is to say, that a person that is actually desirous of no longer self-identifying as a Satanist to themselves, even if to no one else in accord with the aforementioned strategy, is arguably not a real Satanist. Perhaps they concur with our pragmatic philosophy. Maybe that concurrence is accompanied by an abiding resonance with the dark aesthetic. Taken together, it is reasonably expected that such a person may indeed be a real Satanist. Still, it is not a guarantee that they will be so, because even a plain old goth can read Nietzsche and vote for their respective right-wing political representatives. Ergo, that fact definitely explains the existence and apparent popularity of Facebook groups like Goths Against Cancel Culture. Noting this difference is not intended as ridicule at all. As such, an ally is still a value-added variable within the Satanic movement. With the foregoing in mind, let's now turn our attention to how I personally apply and encourage others to proactively instantiate that information. I am a Satanist. I am a Luciferian. I am an infernal initiate of the infernal tradition of the left-hand path. And although I do not normally think of myself as either an occultist or a pagan, I am undeniably the former and, tongue-in-cheek, an infernal pagan in relation to the latter designation. That is to say that I resonate organically with the pragmatic philosophy of LaVeyan canon and also archetypically understand or apprehend Satan as the integrated Jungian shadow of the mythic bearer of illumination, i.e., the pagan deity known by names such as Lucifer. Additionally, I reasonably assert that contemporary religious Satanism is an evolutionary hybrid of the following elements. And of course, I just wrote this last night and today, so, and this is all off the top of my head. I could probably include other things, or maybe include these in sort of a larger umbrella context, but these are the 6 bullet points that I came up with off the top of my head. So, 1, pre-Christian paganism and related mystery traditions. Okay, again, back up. What I'm explaining here is the historical roots, or what Anton LaVey referred to as the black history of Satanism. So these are some of those elements that comprise contemporary religious Satanism. So 1, again, pre-Christian paganism and related mystery traditions. 2, folk religiosity rebranded as what some topical scholars refer to as folk Satanism due to its development of an anti-Christian posture. So that's going to be like your Dianic witchcraft, cults of Aradia, because Diane and Lucifer, brother and sister, are the parents of Aradia, who was sent to teach witchcraft to humanity, at least according to the lore, some of the lore. So, number 3, the liturgical ceremonial structure derived primarily from liturgical Christianity and Freemasonry, while recognizing that some of that very same ritualism was itself co-opted from pre-Christian sources. What the heck is that? Let me look. Okay, it's nothing. It's a glitch in the matrix. It's a glitch in the matrix, people. Okay. Number 4, the stratified real-world philosophical objectivism of LaVeyan canon. Number 5, Jungian depth psychology regarding the religious importance of archetypes. And we could go down a deeper rabbit hole regarding Jungian psychology in reference to modern Satanism, but archetypes has got to be the top of the list, right? So, number 6, the marriage of modern quantum physics and historical notions of folk magic, prayer, and or divine intervention. Relevantly, the foregoing half a dozen umbrella terms are the foundational ingredients to the nutrient and protein-rich recipe that is known as the infernal tradition of the left-hand path. Moreover, one defining attribute distinguishing the infernal tradition and its infernal order of the left-hand path from sects like the Church of Satan, my former alma mater as it were, is that it is an unapologetic initiatory order, conceptually designed to facilitate a mentor/mentee relationship between infernal initiates. True, water does seek its own level, and I do indeed concur with the Church of Satan's strategy of quietly watching its members in order to permit them enough rope to metaphorically hang themselves. Yet, I disavow the LaVeyan entrapment method conjoined with that same cautious method of examination. This divergence is in no small part due to the frequency of newbies hailing from the ranks of youth culture, congruent with the 6th of Anton LaVey's 9 satanic statements, affirming our situationally assumed responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. It is arguably incumbent upon satanic elders, i.e. individuals experienced in matters of satanic living rather than a strict reference to chronological age gaps, to help those that actively work to help themselves in the arduous art and science of stratified antinomian initiation. In Aquino's above-cited book, he apparently, above because I'm reading from the script which will be published on my Substack and my Medium forums later today. So in reference to the prior cited book by Michael Aquino, he apparently presents LaVey's own words about his entrapment method. So a lot of the book is comprised of letters to and fro, not only between those two gentlemen, but between Aquino and a plethora of other people, and it's in one of those communiques, at least one, where LaVey is talking about his preference for the entrapment method of review of his members. So again, in Aquino's book, he apparently presents LaVey's own words about his entrapment method. Although it is obvious that Anton merely meant taking a watch-and-see approach to sizing people up, I will split this hair just a bit for further clarification of the Infernal tradition's perspective as an initiatory order. Entrapment, from a judicial standpoint, presents good cause for the dismissal of criminal charges. This is because it is defined at law as coercing or compelling someone to engage in criminality that, but for such undue influence, the respective defendant would not have otherwise committed in contravention of applicable and enforceable public policy. True, relevant literature is publicly available and, due to the internet, more accessible than at any other point in human history. Regarding a Church of Satan membership processing fee and even annual membership dues in other left-hand path organizations, there is also the intrinsic notion of caveat emptor, i.e., buyer beware. Additionally, there is the instructive legal principle that ignorance of the law is not an excuse to break the law. Collectively considered then, there is a meritorious argument for a sort of arm's length approach to member evaluations. On the other hand, there is an equally meritorious counter-argument to be made predicated on, in part, the aforementioned referenced sixth satanic statement. By leaving new, for lack of a better word, Satanists entirely unintended to by an organizational liaison and or designated mentor, particularly in relation to younger adults with little to no real experience in life, let alone involving something as complex and potentially demanding as a hierarchical satanic institution, it is my experiential opinion that such inattentive guidance is itself a potential form of undue mental influence. There is, after all, a sound reason as to why so many job and career positions solely seek applicants with X amount of work-related education, training, and or professional experience in the pertinent position for hire. Within that framework, the Satanic movement must think long-term, just as avowed Marxists do. That strategic and tactical mindset, therefore, must be one manicured in relation to an agenda dedicated to the cultivation of enclaves of social elitism, as well as the propagation of the cultural influence of religious Satanism. That pursuit, it must be noted, is not in search of pallid social acceptance. Instead, it must be shaped in service of the ongoing development of a pluralistic social infrastructure. Such an idealistic goal is not to necessarily promote satanic civil rights, but to instead help continue the evolution of society on a broader scale. On that, let me take a drink. Okay. Yeah. Do you go to a party and crash the party and say, I'm here at this party, now everybody like me? And it's like, the whole notion that these activists, Satanism, fighting for rights, it's just ridiculous. I give it a pass when it's youth, because youth, when I was young, we do have those activist tendencies. You can go all through human history and see it, so it's just, you just pat the young kids on the head and go, that's right. You just go ahead and you can fight for your rights. Fight for your right to party, Beastie Boys. But, yeah, just a little too much expenditure of otherwise productive energy and resources and potential. So, okay, if ever achieved such a pluralistic society, we live in a pluralistic society, but it's an imperfect union, right? So if we ever achieve perfection, which is highly unlikely, right, to the point of impossibility. So if that is ever achieved, society itself shall then cease to present a negatively conditioned response to Satanism. In its stead, society shall just nonchalantly view Satanism as but one choice among many others available to and exercised by sovereign individuals. Alternately defined, pluralism is achieved when individuals are indisputably empowered to choose or reject their own brand of religiosity without suffering governmental discrimination or requiring the ridiculous fanfare of being appointed its own special little day, month, and or flag. You're not legitimate if you don't have a day, a month, or a flag, or all of the above. It's just, it's like, oh, we're a real satanic church. We got a tax exempt status. Like, oh, ooh, approved by the government. Oh, it's good for you. Okay. People got married for thousands of years and did all the things they did for thousands of years without having a seal from the clerk of court. But okay, whatever. So, however, it must be noted that I fully agree with the LaVeyan disposition that Satanism neither seeks nor wants martyrs. Such theoretical self-sacrifice would therefore arguably be offered for naught. With these factors to consider, the prospect of remaining secretive about one's satanic identity should really only ever be maintained as a means of directly benefiting the individual Satanist standard of living rather than meaninglessly represent some grand gesture devoted to the pursuit of an unlikely satanic utopia. As a far more tangible political goal, it is notable that the relevant gentleman and I both prefer a secularized government supported by secularized Christians as the best worker ant defenders of our imperfect pluralistic Western societies. Certainly, our Christian way of life is demonstrably superior to any other form of actual theocracy. And to that overarching point, a sober understanding of Islam conclusively demonstrates that it is culturally incompatible with the traditions, customs, and cultures of Western or westernized civilization states. After all, it was within the counterculture of pluralistic America itself that Anton LaVey became a world figure as the high priest of the Church of Satan and author of the Satanic Bible. So, script is finished. Let me just simply say this. As I explained, if a person is truly a Satanist, but they want to keep that on the DL so that they can live a life of unfettered success and opportunity, that the very real potentiality of being known as a Satanist could thwart, and maybe you reach it, high on the ladder, on the rung on the ladder of what you define as success, how you define it, right? But you don't make your goals simply because of religious bigotry. It's a reality. So if you want to keep that on the down low, then do that. Absolutely. As far as rebranding, that's why I quoted from Xena, not to castigate the gentleman involved with this question and answer, because I have a very high opinion of him, simply to give that take on this sort of general theme that's been offered before when at a different time in her life, let's put it that way. So someone who believes that they can have the same aesthetic and the same philosophical Weltanschauung worldview, but does not resonate with the word or term Satanism, Satanist, or any of its related adjacent derivatives, then you're probably just not a Satanist, and that's fine. I have known so many people over the years who read the Satanic Bible, and they say, oh yeah, I agree with basically everything in there, but, why call it Satanism? Can't we call it something else? It's like, look, there is Ayn Rand's objectivism. There is empiricism. There's existentialism. There's humanism. There's all these shades of little bits of, of elements that go into what contemporary religious Satanism is. And so there's nothing wrong with having that resonance with satanic ideology. As I'll say over and over again, it's a pragmatic philosophy. It's a way of navigating life or it's a view of how one navigates life that one does not have to be a Satanist to concur with. And I could give you chapter and verse of tons of stuff in the Christian Bible, the Jewish Bible, which Christians call the Old Testament, and the New Testament, which Christians consider part of the canonical Bible, but Jews would say is not, right? Okay, so both of those cultural reference points of Judeo-Christianity, those books are chock full of wisdom. Christianity is one of many mystery traditions, mystery religions, mystery schools. There's a ton about it that I can poo-poo, obviously as a Satanist, that I disagree with. But so many people throw the baby out with the bathwater. So don't martyr yourself. If you're a Satanist, then live satanically, and you don't have to be public in any way, shape, or form. In this day and age where Big Brother's got an eye and an ear on all of us because of our gadgets, unlike when I was coming up as a young Satanist and even as a young man for much of my 20s, prior to this whole explosion, long before social media. I'm just talking about regular old internet, right? AOL chat rooms and message boards and personal websites and things of that nature. When I came up, there was so much more freedom, because you weren't having every moment of your life documented and detailed for somebody to quote unquote cancel you later if you tripped over your own feet when you were 15 or 25 or 35 or whatever. We live in such an unforgiving world these days. It's okay to go through a phase. It's okay to read something and say, wow, I agree with that, but I'm not that. It's perfectly fine. But if you are a Satanist, you will know. You will know that you are a Satanist and that you concur with this worldview and this aesthetic and everything that's interwoven together with it, this lifestyle, this way of seeing, this way of hearing, this way of thinking. You're going to have that organically, and you're not going to be disposed or predisposed or desirous of abandoning your own identity. That does not mean you also want to parade it. You don't have to parade it. Like I said, someone like me, I can't put the genie back in the bottle, but even myself, I don't parade it anymore. I just don't have the need, and I don't want the headache. And unlike the old days of the satanic panic, because there has been in the last few years something of a resurgence of it. We're all aware of that. All of us that are satanic and living in the real world and with our eyes open, right? But the world today is so drastically different than the world I came up in, where, being fired from a job, or, people would have their kids taken away, and custody disputes regarding it, vindictive parents fighting one another, or someone hurting you physically or killing you, or your pets, or all kinds of crazy things. All those things were very, very real, targeting law-abiding Satanists. But today, the majority of the people, when they do find out, they really don't have a problem with it. And even back in the day, except especially as a youngster, I really wore my Satanism on my sleeve. But people that engaged with me, say like when I was a young man in the military, people that knew me just as a soldier, even girls I dated from the nightclubs in Germany and stuff, that just got to know me as that soldier that I know from the nightclub. Everybody, once they knew me, when they found out, it didn't faze them at all. They're like, oh, okay. Well, I probably would have freaked out and thought that was weird if that was the first thing I know about you, but now I know you and I like you and I respect you. So, make those good impressions first, and then if you trust people with that secret part of your life, and it doesn't have to be secret, you can be as loud and as proud as you want, but if it's something you want to keep on the DL for a million very valid reasons, but you also, are not going to keep it strictly to yourself, you're just going to let a few people into that part of your world. Once they know you and they trust you and you have that established relationship, it's really unlikely that that's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So make your choice wisely, but don't do it for the greater good of Satanism, because Satanism doesn't need it. As Anton LaVey is known to have said more than once, right? Satanism will take care of itself. So don't beat yourself up, people. We already have a Jesus on the cross. We already have an Odin on the tree. We don't need another. But, if you want to, go ahead. Whatever. Hey, people of the internet, you have yourself a fantastic day. And remember, where am I? I'm seeing stuff backwards. Go do devil stuff. See you later, alligator. Fuck.
Warning. The system has become unstable.